What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. I am so excited about today's episode because we're out here in the garden today talking about an inexpensive way to not only build your soil, but protect your soil for spring. I see so many gardeners making this mistake of leaving their gardens bare. We've talked about this ad nauseum, I think, and you guys are probably sick and tired of it. But for all the new people, and to reiterate on old points, I want to make this episode because it is very, very important to drive home that we, as gardeners, we have to take care of our soil by covering it. This is one of the final things that we do every single year. Whenever we have our garden pulled up, the final thing we have to do is cover it. And now I always say you can cover it with a perennial, you can cover it with a tarp, or you can cover it with a mulch. But you have to cover it with something, because if you don't cover it with something, the soil will degrade. And it's a very common misconception that the soil degrades faster in the summer than it does in the winter. It's actually completely the opposite. Soil degrades more in the winter months than it does in the summer months, and I'll explain why. So soil degradation happens by a couple ways. One of them is by leaching fertility. Whenever you have precipitation, whether it's rain, whether it's snow that melts and then turns into water that runs to the soil, all of that water and precipitation carries with it nutrients. Vital nutrients and fertility leaves the soil. So that's one way that you can lose your overall soil quality. The next thing that you can lose is you can lose soil structure. Now, what happens when you get a lot of snow or when you get a lot of rain, the rain and snow is very, very heavy. And snow in particular can be extremely heavy. So heavy that what happens is over the winter months, if there's no barrier, if there's no protection, that snow can compact down and the weight of the snow can press a lot of those air gaps out of the soil. And you'll notice that in the springtime, what was in the fall a very loose and fluffy bed is now a thick caked layer of hard pack, because all of that snow just pressed down over the months of having it on top of that soil. It presses all of the air out, and you're left with a very thick, cakey layer that's void of any air. Now, the problem with that is that you can go back and flip it over, but once you lose the air, you lose a lot of the oxygen. And the oxygen is what life is relying on. The bacteria, the fungi, as well as the plant roots rely on that oxygen. And so if you lose the oxygen, you also lose the fertility. And then the third thing you can lose is you can lose topsoil. So a lot of times we talk about how in large agricultural settings, topsoil has been degraded because the wind and the conditions are just not suitable for holding on topsoil. You have thousands of acres that are open to the wind just blowing and raking across it. However, a very similar thing can happen in our garden beds. When you don't have leaves on the trees, the problem is that the trees add a buffer in the summertime and the springtime, as well as the fall, early fall. Those trees add a buffer for wind. But you'll notice that when the leaves fall off the trees, the winds are far stronger. And that's because the wind just cuts right through. The branches don't really provide much of a buffer, whereas the leaves typically do provide more of a buffer. And so when you get those really strong winds, those gusts, that can blow off really light and dry topsoil that is basically the thing supporting your garden's life. That is what contains most of the fertility and most of the minerals and nutrients is in that top 1 inch of topsoil. So it's very critical that as gardeners we take care of that. And those three things can be protected by adding a mulch. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is we're going to be mulching our garden with basically free resources from around our yard. We're going to be taking out our lawnmower and we're going to be basically bagging up grass clippings as well as shredded up leaves, and we're going to be utilizing that to top our garden beds off with. That's also going to do a couple things. Not only is it going to protect our soil from the precipitation and the leaching, because it's going to act as an insulative barrier, but it's also going to add organic matter as well. As that stuff breaks down, it doesn't just sit in your bed. It breaks down slowly, and over time it'll add organic matter to your soil, actually increasing the fertility. Rather than just protecting what you have, rather than just protecting the fertility, it'll add to the fertility. And that's a very crucial component to getting your garden ready for spring. A lot of people, they just don't re-amend their soil. And this is a very easy way to at least somewhat re-amend your soil, because leaves and grass clippings do have minerals and nutrients that when they break down, they're going to be given to that soil that your plants can utilize in the following year. So, all right, let's grab the, man, it's freezing out. Let's grab the lawnmower and we'll get to mowing. And then after I get some stuff bagged up, we'll put on the beds and get our garden ready for spring. All right, let's go. All right, in about 2 minutes time and maybe 150 square feet of our yard, we turn that into a beautiful full bag of mulch for our garden beds. Now this is great for a couple reasons. One is the cost was pretty much free. Now the cost of gas obviously is a cost, but it's so negligible. We're talking a couple pennies worth to get this much mulch here, but this is going to save us so much in the spring. Number one, it's going to save us a lot of time and hassle of having to work our beds, because this is actually going to protect the fluffiness and looseness of our soil. So we're not going to have to take time to work our beds. We're also not going to have to buy any compost or soil additives to fill up our beds, because this is going to break down and add volume. Now you might have to still buy a little bit, but the amount that this is going to save is going to be well worth your time. And also what this is going to do is it's going to add nutrients, meaning you're going to have to fertilize less, and that's going to save money as well. So this actually is a huge money saver, but it also is a time saver. The last thing that makes this so great is just the fertility that this is going to add to your soil. What's really nice about running it through a lawnmower is, as you'll see, it's got a beautiful composition of both nitrogen and carbon. The nitrogen comes from the green grass clippings, and the carbon comes from the leaves. Now what you're looking for with really good compost is a carbon to nitrogen ratio of about 50%. Usually it's about 30% nitrogen to 70% carbon, but when you're mowing over grass clippings and you're getting leaves as well, you're coming up with somewhere in between a 50-50 and a 30-70. I don't really look at this and analyze it that in depth. What I am getting is I'm getting carbon and I'm getting nitrogen. And those are two components that are great for adding organic matter and fertility to your soil. Now what makes the carbon and nitrogen so important to have in your soil is that the nitrogen, you can't just add 100% nitrogen to your soil, because if you add just green grass clippings, what you'll notice is that anytime you have anything high in nitrogen, grass clippings, fruit peels, anything like that, when they break down, they tend to stink a lot, but they also tend to really turn slimy and mushy. And that's because they have a lot of water content and a lot of nutritional value, but they don't have a whole lot of structure. The structure comes from the carbon. The carbon is basically the backbone of your soil. It's so important to have carbon because that's what adds the looseness and the fluffiness. If you just take nitrogen, by the time it breaks down, you end up with almost nothing, and then whatever is left over is really slimy, and it's very nutritious. It's very, very high in nutrition, but it's not very high in structure. And so you need structure. And so basically you can look at it like this. I was told this from an old farmer, and I really loved how he said this. The nitrogen is like the mortar in between the bricks. So if you're not going to build a whole house with just mortar. You actually build most of your house with bricks. The mortar is just what kind of holds it together. It's the critical point that holds the whole house together, but it's not necessary to build the whole house with mortar, because if you do, the house is actually not really structurally sound. It's the bricks that add the structure. So I really loved that analogy, and it was an old farmer that told me that, and it's always kind of stuck with me, and I really enjoyed that. So we're gonna go add this to our beds, and yeah, we'll be done, ready for spring. All right, let's go. All right, so I got this bed here, and this is the bed that we did our trench composting on. So beneath this layer of soil is actually all of the stuff that was originally growing on this bed. All of our squash plants and bean plants are actually running down this trench here. And so we're just gonna put this mulch right on top. And that way, it's going to insulate the soil. It's gonna keep the soil warmer. It's gonna be able to be planted sooner in the spring. It's also gonna keep all of the beneficial bacteria and fungi that are composting that material in the trench. It's going to help them to stay warmer longer so they can continue to break down. And this right here is going to be a great combo to help this bed have as much fertility as possible with relatively no cost at all. I mean, the stuff that was growing here, we put back in to fertilize in the trench, and then we're putting our leaf mulch and grass clippings on top to break down as well. We don't have to bring any compost in to this bed right here. Now it's very important that we add about a 3-inch layer of this, because you want it thick enough so that it is gonna compact down, and you wanna have that little bit of insulation, a little bit of padding that's going to help the soil to be able to withstand the weight of the snow, as well as be able to break down over winter without having nothing left in the spring. Ideally, you do want a little bit left on the top of the soil in spring, and you can either rake that away and throw it in the compost pile, and that's usually what we do, or you can just leave it there and use it as a mulch that you can plant right in directly. So either way, you do want a little bit of mulch left over. All right, now all we have to do is just do the rest of our yard and top off the rest of our beds with this mulch, and we'll be good to go for spring. So the last thing I wanted to mention is that you can also utilize this around your fruit trees, around your perennials, anything that has to go through winter that you don't want the cold winter weather to attack as heavily. This will be a great insulative barrier for the root system of all those plants as well. So it doesn't have to be just used on your raised beds as a mulch. It can be used as a mulch anywhere else. And so that's another really great side note. But I hope you guys will try this. I hope you will utilize it. I know it's a little bit late, and unfortunately, some people in the north of us probably already have snow cover and can't really utilize this method. But if the snow melts and you get a chance to get a lawnmower out there, or even a rake, and rake up some of those leaves, it'll pay huge dividends in the spring. So make sure you get out there, use this method. If you still have time to use it, definitely get out there and use this method. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And as always, we'll catch you all on tomorrow's episode. Grow big or go home. Bye.